I've been leading a project for FEMA that is initiated by the Deputy Administrator for Preparedness and Protection, Tim Manning. And our goal here is to examine the actions that are in use right now, the guidance we give the public on what to do for various hazards. To identify which actions are key for life-saving and preventing injuries, and to use the best quality research available to determine whether there's science that validates the guidance that we're giving. Pretty important base. And to then document and report on those findings, and to use those findings as the base for updating FEMA's guidance and working with our many partners, Shakeout being one of them, to provide that unified guidance to everyone. And then underneath all of this, our goal is to expand the science base that's informing the guidance that we give the public. Very important. So, what we set up to do this is just a piece of the methodology, is we did a stoplight system of 3 levels. We're trying to identify where the green is where there's sufficient evidence for us to continue to provide this guidance, and there's not significant conflicting guidance, and where we have some quality research, peer-reviewed, that supports it. Yellow is where there's guidance that there was research that's conditional, doesn't apply across all of the areas of guidance. That's where most of the results are. And the last one is where the guidance is insufficient and the science is insufficient. The guidance should be withdrawn or counter-marketed. It was out, but it's wrong. So that's pretty important. So the first thing we need to start with on identifying things that affect lives and injuries is what are the major sources of impact, human impact. And so to get this right, we looked at in earthquake, we have very few frequent phenomena to study. So we're looking at mostly the quakes in California. We also did look at national material as well. And basically, the bottom line of this is a kind of summary level that you all know, is that the objective is to avoid collapse and debris and falls. And we looked at, in looking at that, and here's a list of some of the main studies that we looked at, and you'll see Kim Schoaf, who's speaking next, is referenced on at least 2 of those, so we're pleased to have her to be able to talk about that. Is one of the surprises to us was a very high percentage, in many cases half, of the injuries are from non-structural debris. Deaths from collapse, but injuries and serious injuries from falls and non-structural debris. And we have not been emphasizing either of those to the degree necessary. So, using that as a base, we've already made some tweaks to the message, and Mark is going to talk about many more of the tweaks we've made. And that is, one of the first things we did was we changed the map that we're using to communicate with the public. And actually, Dr. Nico Luco talked a little bit about this because he's the one we went to for help in developing a new map. We said, we want a map that we can show the public that shows where you need to do pre-earthquake protective actions, mitigation, to secure items so that you are not seriously injured by stuff coming at you from your bookshelves or grandma's vase or whatever, because we need to put an emphasis on this. The next action that we worked on, and again, working very closely with SCEC and with earthquake country and the messaging that's really premier messaging on earthquake was that we think people were looking at the objective as cover. And the objective is avoiding the debris. So going through glass and things falling and flying at you to get under a table is not what our objective is. And we need to get it so that people aren't falling on their way to, quote, better cover. So one of the things we've done is tweak the graphics in the message, and there'll be more tweaking going on, is to emphasize dropping, to get below the debris, but also to avoid falling. And to indicate that cover is an objective, but the decision to move to someplace else has to be based on what's between you and the so-called better cover. So don't go through a dangerous situation to get somewhere you think is better. And the hold on is pretty much the same. So that is a significant, we called it tweaking, message change. There were some other areas that really are more in the conditional. One was guidance on whether or not to exit a building, and that really depends on what kind of building afterwards, what kind of building you're in, what damage there was, what's outside. We don't have definitive guidance on that. Another one is personal cover, like what do you put over your head or neck as you're covering and holding. And there's no specific validated item or items that are better than others based on research. So, in terms of our, I think I just went right, yes, and post-hazard is another large area that we need to look at. So in terms of our recommendations, we found huge gaps. One of them was in cross-discipline data collection post-hazard. We need a better multidiscipline database of what causes the deaths and injuries, and particularly some of the social sciences of why people were doing what they were doing. And as I said, personal cover and post-disaster cleanup are causes of deaths and injuries that we don't have good science on. So how do we motivate? This is really just there to show you that the social science is part of that, and that is, we then design our messages, we use the social sciences and multiple models on how we design the messaging. And these are some of the key aspects that we focus on in order to have messages that basically motivate behavioral change. A summary, for anyone who wants just the two-word summary, was used earlier. It's called buy-in. And all of these are elements of buy-in. We also are doing the first that we know of hazard-based assessments with our National Household Survey. That is, in the past, we did these national assessments, and we'd ask people if they thought they were at risk for an earthquake, but we didn't know the answer, so we would say, oh, gee, X% think they're at risk. That's too low. But now what we do is a oversample of people who live in locations that are in the earthquake map areas, and we ask them if they think it will happen where they are or could happen where they are, so we now know whether they're right or not. And the good news is that a very high percentage of folks living in earthquake areas know that that is a risk. So that's really the threshold issue, and that's great. The other numbers, and that's way higher than many other hazards. The other numbers are pretty low, but high compared to some other hazards, and that is only about half have seen information, telling them what to do. Only a little more than half think that preparing would help. Only a little more than half have taken steps to reduce their vulnerability to or to increase their protection or their actions to be ready to act for falling items, like not securing their items, basically. You'll see all of these are at the kind of 1/2 level. So we want to, the conclusion is basically exactly what I started with, and that is we need to expand the discussion and the validation of protective actions. And we want to solicit, we will be publishing the report of all these actions, and we're going to be asking all of you with relevant information to challenge our conclusions by providing studies that show either additional information or that help us clarify it. Our goal here is to document what we know collectively, not to be the authority. We also want to have an increase and work with Mark and others on increasing the focus on drills and exercises to grow that number. And we think we need to do considerable emphasis on pre-disaster non-structural mitigation, securing items. Yes, continue with our messaging on retrofit and making it so that a building collapse is not the issue, but we have as many as 50% of the serious injuries are coming from debris that can be secured in advance. And even if the building is great, the debris, non-structural debris, is still going to be there. And we want to engage all of you in this. So I'm now going to turn this over to Kim, who's going to talk about the very serious challenge we have on the science.
Thank you, Jackie, as we dance up here on the stage and figure out how to get here. I've been incredibly pleased over the last 2 years that we've sporadically worked together as we've talked about this, and I'm really thrilled to see that as we look at these protective actions that we are seriously taking into consideration the science basis, the evidence for this. I would say up till this point in time, I felt pretty confident that a lot of the stuff that we're doing, particularly drop, cover, hold on, is what I consider to be evidence-informed. And there's a difference between evidence-informed and evidence-based. And evidence-informed means that we have evidence broadly about these things. We have theory and other things that can help us move there. But evidence-based means that we have direct evidence that helps us to be able to make decisions about what those best things are. And so I reposted Jackie's slide here on where we're at. And thinking about this green light, talk a little bit more from a perspective in science that we look at in health in terms of making decisions about what health things we recommend. Every one of our clinicians, when we go to the doctor for our annual exam and they have these screening tests and things that, they tell us to do things like get a colonoscopy at the age of 50, right? And we all go, ew. But there is evidence behind that, and there's a value, and there's different levels of evidence, and that changes over time. And this is actually a little bit of an older version of how they rate clinical evidence because it's clearer than the newer version. The newer version is a little more muddled. But this talks about what quality of evidence that we use to make those recommendations. And when we look at this, we look at there's 5 categories of evidence that we use. And the top category is evidence from at least one properly designed randomized control trial. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that is. And that is what we consider to be the gold standard in the medical field. That if we're recommending something, that's what the gold standard that we want the science to be behind that recommendation. There are other levels, level 2, and there's 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, and those include well-designed control trials that are not randomized, evidence from well-designed cohort and case control studies, and we'll talk about that, and preferably from more than one research center, so it's not the same person doing it over and over again, but multiple people looking at that. And then evidence from multiple time series without an intervention, or in addition to what we call natural experiments. And natural experiments are, we knew what it was beforehand. We watched the event occur naturally, and then we knew what the change was afterwards. We didn't actually make that intervention. And then the third level, and this is pretty much the level that we've been functioning under in hazard science and looking at personal protective actions, is the opinions of respected authorities based on clinical experience, descriptive studies, or reports of expert committees. And a lot of what we've been doing is based on the reports of expert committees and experience in the fields. Not even a lot in terms of descriptive studies. But we've got a few descriptive studies that they've been able to do that. And when we look at that, we need to be getting to that point in our field of using, at a minimum, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 type evidence, and not just type 3 evidence. So let me talk a little bit about what those are. So 2 different types of research studies. We have experimental and observational. For the most part, we've been using a lot of observational research. To date, most of the surveys and things that we look at like that are observational studies. We don't do any interventions, we just see what happened, what's out there. When we look at this, if we classify this, the question is, are we introducing some sort of an intervention? Are we doing that? If we are, then that's an experimental study. If we're not, then it's an observational study. In an observational study, can we compare against groups? And some of the things that we look at are things like case control studies, cohort studies, or cross-sectional studies. And I'll talk about those in a little more detail. If we get to, on the other side, the experimental, if we're introducing an intervention and testing it, the difference is if it's randomized or not, whether it's a randomized control trial or a non-randomized control trial. So that's where we look at those. The analytical study designs, cross-sectional designs, what we talk about, we use the term exposure and disease. So we look at the exposure, the earthquake, right? The ground motion, the ground shaking, or the building damage, or the things that are flying, and the outcome, injuries, deaths, other things, are measured in the individuals at the same point in time. So we're looking at what happened to them, what the input was and what the output was at the same time. In a cohort study, we're beginning with the exposure, and we're saying, okay, people who were exposed to a certain type of ground motion, and then we follow them to see what were the outcomes. And we look at people with different types of, they had they were experiencing strong ground motion versus those who didn't experience strong ground motion. And we look to see what the outcomes are. A case control study starts from the other end. We look at people who are injured and compare them to people who weren't injured, and then go back and look at what the exposures were. And ecological studies look at these things often in a cross-sectional nature, so all measured at the same time, but at population level data as opposed to individual level data. So we're looking at community X versus community Y as opposed to individual A, B, C, D in a single community or across communities. So here's a couple of earthquake studies that we have. I'm going to say that I have not yet seen, I understand the Christchurch earthquake has an extensive data set on these types of things. These are 2 data sets that I have access to that are pretty complete data sets. The Northridge earthquake one is the most complete data set. This is cross-sectional data that was collected from multiple sources. We have all the hospital admissions in Los Angeles County for the 2 weeks following the earthquake and the 2 weeks before the earthquake. We have the coroner's records associated with the earthquake. We have a population-based household survey for 1,800 households in Los Angeles County. And then we have building damage data we have inspection data for the city of Los Angeles. So we have this cross-sectional data set all collected at the same time across multiple sources about Los Angeles County and what happened to people in Los Angeles County. Similarly, in Turkey, we have a cross-sectional data set collected from a population-based household survey with a lot of data in it. What do we need to have? From most of the publications and most of the things that we have that we've used in terms of protective action come from those earthquakes and from those data sets. because it's pretty much the only thing out there in a lot of ways that comes at least to that level of category 2-3 of cross-sectional studies. We need to have the following three things, or some mix of these. We need to have multiple well-designed cross-sectional studies with the same data collection methodology to validate the information we have from the Northridge and the Turkey earthquakes. We need to have from different size earthquakes. We need to have from different types of building type. We need to have from different types of populations. We need to be able to look at this across different types of events to be able to say, yes, drop, cover, and hold on is good no matter where you are. Because right now we know that in Northridge, not moving was a good thing. And we know that in Turkey, the more you moved, the worse it was. We don't know anything about any place else. That's all we know at this point in time. Case control and cohort studies. We need to identify the injured and non-injured and examine the exposures that they had and the actions they took during the earthquake. Right? So who was injured, who wasn't injured? We start from there. We can look at from hospitals. We can look at hospitals, and we've actually done some of this using from the Northridge earthquake. We have some of this data about people who were hospitalized with their injuries versus people who were not injured from the hospital data and the survey data. We can also look the other direction and say, we can look at people who had dropped, covered, and held on, and then see what happened to them. So we start with the exposure. Did they drop, cover, and hold on? Yes, no. Were those who dropped, covered, and held on, were they less likely to be injured? And we can look at it from that perspective. The highest level is experimental designs. We can look at experiments. No, we cannot experimentally expose some community to one type of earthquake and everybody there drop, covers, and hold on, and somebody else gets a different type of earthquake and they don't drop, cover, and hold on. We can't do that. I wish we could, but we can simulate that to a certain extent, and we can look at experimental studies where we look at crash test dummies or people on shake tables and start looking at how that works. So to do these cross-sectional studies well, we need a random population proportionate to size sample of households. That's some statistical mumbo jumbo. We need sufficient sample size based on the projected injury rate. And those injury rates vary from 8% to 25%, depending on the earthquake. We need a standardized questionnaire. We need to be asking the same questions in the same fashion time after time after time of different people with different experiences, with trained interviewers. These are some of this is the components of the classification. This is the type of data that we need for individual level variables, building level variables, and hazard level variables for each earthquake that we examine. Case control studies. These can be, like I said, these can be done if you have good cross-sectional data and you have both the cases identified and a sample of controls. So you need to have both hospital or cases and survey or controls data to be able to do this. Cohort studies. We select the subject based on exposure. We can look at, so one of the things that frustrates me is that we know that 16 of the 33 people who died in the Northridge earthquake died in a single building. They died in the Northridge Meadows apartment building. We have no idea how many people lived in that apartment building and what they did and what their experience was. So we cannot use that data to tell us anything other than 16 people died in that building. And then experiments. So these are just some different types. This is one of the things. This is actually a study. This is a proposal that I put in. And I'm airing my dirty laundry here. Mark asked me to air dirty laundry. And it's blinking red at me, but that's right. Mark will cut off at his time. So this is a study that we proposed to look at, to use the shake table, using anthropometric test dummies on a shake table and human subjects to evaluate the effectiveness of drop, cover, hold on, and casualty modeling. This was the response. Oh, so this is what happened. So that was one of the proposals. This was a proposal to suggest that we need to do multiple cross-sectional studies. This was the review that I got, not funded. The proposal was well written and deals with an important topic. However, there are questions about the novelty and innovativeness of the research question, and it would seem that the research would offer only incremental advancements of our knowledge on this topic. Because it's a narrow focus on a single event, now this is the second or third event that I've tried to get funding for, there are concerns about the generalizability of the findings. That's multiple cross-sections. Nope, it's only incremental. This is the experimental research. This is the one that kills me. This was that drop, cover, hold, this was that shake table test, right? This study it tells what it does. It will provide useful information. This is a brand new area of endeavor, so it's innovative and novel. That mixes public health and earthquake engineering. It's cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary. And I think Keith is Keith in the room? We had engineers and public health people and different types of engineers on this proposal, so it was a unique collaboration. Sounds pretty good, right? The project addresses one of the primary research needs as defined by the National Research Council and the important concerns raised by the Multi-Hazard Mitigation Council. You'd think this would be funded, right? It has strong intellectual merit with a strong support team. This area of research needs to be conducted. The panel rates this proposal not recommended based on the use of the NEC equipment site not being justified. Marla's laughing because she remembers me screaming about this afterwards. How do we get the evidence? How do we get, if we are saying we want evidence-based responses, we want evidence-based actions, we need to fund the evidence. Maybe it's just me, but I have actually been the reviewer on 3 or 4 similar anthropometric test dummy proposals for NSF that have also not been funded. And I reviewed them as fund if possible. We're not doing it.
On that note,
I'm shy, Mark.
I know. Thanks, Kim. This is something that, of course, in running Shakeout for the last 8 years, that we've been really seeing as a real needed priority. And researchers like Kim have, as she's expressed, tried, and others have also, and we need to, as a community, be advocating for this. I think partly there's a focus on, of course, preventing the buildings and researching the building issues and preventing collapse in the first place is a priority. But there's all the other aspects, as Jackie pointed out, and that Kim has developed in her research, of why people are getting injured by the things falling, and the message of the type of the validation that we have is a type of validation, but how do we continue to move this forward? And it's something that's really important. So I'm going to talk about this aspect of how we've been providing information in the absence of a certain level of research, but I think we have a lot of basis for what we are doing. It's just a different type of basis that if we had more would make our messaging that much stronger in how we communicate. We've called this session Tweaking the Message, and there are tweaks that are happening now, and there are tweaks that will continue to happen, but we've been tweaking this message for many, many years. Many of you here, much longer than I've been involved in this type of message. Of course, long before even duck, cover, hold on, and we still face this, there was get in the doorway, and there's other things that people have been told to do, namely avoiding running outside during an earthquake, because we know that's damaging, or that's dangerous. At some point, and I don't know who exactly kind of put this into the official lexicon, but we switched from duck, cover, hold on, because apparently of some sort of translation issue of duck into other languages, literally became a duck that quacks, to drop. And that really is kind of more what we're asking people to do. Notice that in all of these pictures on this slide here, and I should say that the lower ones from the booklet, Putting Down Roots in Earthquake Country, That was the single image about what to do during an earthquake, so it wasn't the 3 kind of panels as you're familiar with. But notice it's all about being under a table, kind of right up front. Duck under a table, drop under a table, be under a table, stay covered under a table, hold on under the table. And we always get the questions, well, what if there's not a table? So there's been an evolution here. And one slight tweak of that message back in 2008 with the advent of the Great Southern California Shakeout originally was this new graphic that many of you have seen. And so we slightly tweaked the drop to not have the person under the table, at least the beginning. And as some of the images that Jackie was showing, and I'll come back to, we've even removed the table in that first scene more lately. Amazingly, that particular image has just gone worldwide. It's been picked up, and we come across it in places that, there wasn't any sort of formal request for that, and that was part of the nature of Shakeout, is give it away. Have people take it on. They don't need formal permission to use copyrighted materials. It's all government supported in that way. We have on the top left, the drop cover hold on from New Zealand. On the right there is from the Philippines. In the middle left is Mexico City. In the middle there is from America Samoa. Those are billboards around the country. I think Kate Long, you took this picture, right? In the lower, I forget exactly where that is. On the lower right is from Bhutan. And it's a hand-drawn sign. And what you'll notice is, while the image is a little bit different, they have the exclamation point after drop, cover, hold on. So we think that's a connection to our original one where we have that exclamation point. So it's just gone kind of worldwide. And that's also the influence of our messaging being picked up around the world. And that's partly the challenge in now tweaking the message, because it's out there so pervasively. Now to change it is to follow up and make sure that now we don't have multiple versions and confusing people. So that's partly kind of a challenge to me and all the colleagues that we work with on how to get the consensus on the change that is about to happen. Just a little bit of pop culture here of sorts. Because of the partnership with FEMA Individual and Community Preparedness Division and America's Preparathon 2013, we had even drop cover hold on in the Dennis the Menace comic on Shakeout Day, October 17th. And Preparathon is a supporter of Shakeout, and we're a partner campaigns. If you're familiar with it, it's kind of like Shakeout for other hazards. Shakeout is connected in as the earthquake hazard. You're told if you go to register for all these different activities that you may be doing for preparedness, and it's really been growing year by year. Last Saturday was one of the 2 National Preparathon days that happen each year. And a lot of activities keep growing, and it's really fantastic. Also fantastic is the work that FEMA has been supporting for the messaging that's being provided by America's Preparathon and connected in with Shakeout. You'll see that in the earthquake messaging, there's co-branding between Preparathon and Shakeout. This How to Prepare for an Earthquake guide is excellent and has the new map that Jackie talked about, and also has this new graphic. And that was shown earlier too. But note and we work together on this. It's kind of like the prototype for what we want to roll out and get consensus around. The idea of dropping first, and then covering your head and neck, and then seek, if there is a table nearby, that you can seek additional protection to get that. If there's not, don't try to move to the room down the hall that has the table to get next to an interior wall. Anything that can provide that additional shelter, keep your hand covered. And then also when you get under the table, because things may be coming in from the side, still having an arm and hand protecting your head as best as possible. So that's more of the current messaging. And this has shown up. Also, of course, there was a little movie last year that itself had some conflicting messaging in it. The scientists were saying drop, cover, hold on. The expert on protective actions, The Rock, at one point mentioned another theory. I think they thought they were both good in the scripting of this. So, but I'll play the PSA that came out. Oops. Let's see. Maybe I need to go into it. Caldwell, you helping?
Everybody down! The Earthquakes you see in movies are one thing, but real life is a completely different animal. Just because you can't predict an earthquake doesn't mean that you can't prepare for one. In the event of a real earthquake, you should drop, cover, and hold on. Visit ready.gov/earthquake and practice what to do to keep you and your family safe in the event of a real earthquake, and you'll be seen as a hero by your family and your loved ones.
Visit ready.gov/earthquake today.
So that's great. Ad Council, Ready Campaign, FEMA, putting that out there. Did anybody see this on TV at 2 and 3 in the morning? Maybe that's partly what happens. But it's on YouTube, getting a lot of hits. The best thing I thought about the San Andreas movie is that they actually had shakeout posters in the movie. Oddly, under the table that they get under. At least if you do the right thing, you'll know that you did the right thing. So again, emphasizing dropping down to the ground. You know, here's a picture from Mexico City of a collapsed school with all the desks holding up the floors there. If you hadn't dropped right away, those floors would have dropped on you. So getting down low, really key. Makes yourself a smaller target. So that's the first step there. Various aspects of covering, and I'll get a little bit more on this, but that the idea that you're protecting your head and neck as you're seeking additional shelter, or if there's not, you continue in that position. And then holding on, and again, that because things may be coming in from the side, the tweak of the message of keeping a hand and arm over your head and neck. So one of the things that we've been doing too is making videos of these different actions in different situations. I'm going to share one of these videos. We have a whole series of them. So I'll share this first.
Great shakeout earthquake drills remind you to drop, cover, and hold on to protect yourself during an earthquake in most situations. Let's practice what to do if a sturdy desk or table is nearby. When you feel shaking, immediately drop down onto your hands and knees. An earthquake is less likely to knock you over in this position, and you're a smaller target for anything falling or flying. Then, cover your head with your arms. Clasp your hands around your neck. Bend over to protect your vital organs. If you can move safely and a sturdy desk or table is nearby, keep one arm over your head as you crawl to additional shelter. Finally, hold on by gripping a table leg or other part of your shelter. Continue protecting your head and neck with your other arm. Remain on your knees and bent over, ready to move with your shelter when it shifts during the shaking. Close your eyes and mouth to protect against dust and debris. Remain in this position until the shaking stops. After the shaking is over, wait a moment and check all around and above you before getting up or leaving your shelter. Register at shakeout.org to practice earthquake safety with millions of people worldwide and to see videos showing what to do in a variety of situations.
So this is kind of what we're trying to do is like airline safety video style kind of information. It's not scary, it's very calm, it's very precise also. Will anybody really be able to exactly cover their head just to that degree? Perhaps not, but we want to provide the example to strive for, at least in this. So we've also done similar videos for if you're like in a theater situation, if there is no table nearby. We're just finishing one if you're near the shore, so it combines tsunami messaging. We will be doing one if you're in bed and if you're outside. And we also have filmed a video for people with disabilities and access and functional needs, multiple aspects, though we're going to actually redo this video. Along with that, we have new messaging on what to do in these situations if you can't get down or if you can't get back up, not getting down. But the aspect of lock, cover, hold on, if you're in a wheelchair or walker, locking your wheels, covering your head and neck. So earthquakecountry.org/disability is where you can find that information. The one tweak we've been able to kind of sneak in a lot of our messaging is the hold on, actually having the hand over the head, which previously wasn't. But we do want to evolve this image, and it's just going to be, we have this image in so many places, so it's a lot of redoing of resources and also getting that kind of global consensus. I will point out that this is going up on billboards just around the country. Arkansas 2015, it should say. Anybody see the USGS electronic billboard with this on your drive down the 710 to get here? I saw it on the way down yesterday morning. So that's coming out just right now. Also out in the hall, there's a poster that we invite feedback on. We're really showing people in many different situations, not just if there's a desk. So we're really trying to get out. We're taking basically a step forward to being willing to really be more comprehensive in our messaging that we're putting out. So this poster, sponsored by FEMA, support through to California, but really designed for the whole country, is new. And please go look at it on the table just outside and send your comments. So going forward, again, we'll be updating a lot of our resources online, getting more towards this type of graphic here. Also looking internationally with the guidance that's being looked at where building codes and building standards are different. And there's an excellent document from Geohazards International on protective actions around the world with a very comprehensive look at all the factors that go into this. Very interesting stuff, so I highly recommend that. So here's our contact information for the three of us. I'm not sure about time for questions right now. No, because we started late. Come on up. All right. And I also want to really thank FEMA for their support for Shakeout and for the research that Jackie has been doing, really providing the basis of what we're continuing to go forward with. Thank you, everybody.